Live from the headquarters of teleSUR English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Soini Gray. Colombian authorities have shut the borders with neighboring countries ahead of the elections this Sunday. Authorities say they want to avoid any distractions ahead of this weekend's legislative elections, but didn't elaborate further. Progressive forces have raised concerns about violence in the run-up to the elections. They criticized President Juan Manuel Santos for failing to address the issue. Authorities stress that only land borders have been affected.
Remember, in these electoral days, historically, the borders have been closed. Not only the borders where we are today in La Guajira, the borders with Ecuador, Peru, Brazil, and Venezuela have also been closed. We have always closed all these checkpoints. Remember that these are terrestrial and fluvial crossings. The air and maritime checkpoints continue to operate without any problem.
For a look at what is at stake on Sunday, let's cross to Jose Manuel Jimenez in Bogota.
This Sunday, Colombians will choose the new Congress. There are 102 seats up for grabs in the Senate and 166 in the House of Representatives, a total of 268 lawmakers. This number was increased in a decision by the Colombian government and the FARC in the Havana agreements. The deal guarantees 10 seats for the FARC in the Congress of the Republic, half of them in the Senate and the other half in the House of Representatives. Colombians will also decide on Sunday the presidential candidates through bipartisan consultations. The right wing is holding the first ones. Their candidates are Iván Duque, Marta Lucía Ramírez, and the former attorney Alejandro Ordóñez. The second consultation comes from the Colombian left wing, with Dr. Jaime Caicedo and Dr. Gustavo Petro. So, next Monday, Colombia will wake up with a new political scene to face the presidential elections on May 27th.
We spoke to Jose Antonio Figuera, a research professor at the Central University of Ecuador and PhD in Latin American Cultural Studies at Georgetown University. He says two key issues continue to dog Colombia: paramilitarism and agrarian reform, and the combination of the two could lead to electoral fraud.
Today, paramilitarism continues to exert power in rural areas due to the abandonment of the state of vast regions of the country because of the displacement of FARC, the mobilized guerrillas who have abandoned regions which have been immediately taken by the paramilitary groups. The growth of coca production that has been increasing dramatically during the government of Juan Manuel Santos, and the consolidation of the extreme right at the national level that opposes the agrarian reform. That is one of the most important points of the Havana negotiation between Juan Manuel Santos and FARC. As a last point, I would like to remark that paramilitarism and the rural and urban violence that it promotes are factors that help strongly to consolidate fraud in many senses. And in a country with a voluntary vote, the armed groups force the peasants or the poor sectors to deposit their vote for those who the paramilitaries decide. The paramilitaries retain voters' identification documents and also buy votes and displace voters from one municipality to another in a phenomenon in Spanish known as transhumancia de votos. It's a kind of migration of votes from one municipality to another. Those among the big problems produced by the presence of paramilitarism and its connection with fraud.
And the Colombian electoral process was further undermined when the FARC political party announced that it will pull out of the presidential polls. Members say they're at risk because they're on the ballot.
In an official statement Thursday, the party noted it's been suffering threats during the campaign. But more notably, the main reason for pulling out is Rodrigo Londoño's illness.
Our current circumstances are already known by the public. The recovery process that our candidate Dimo needs to go through, together with the threats we have received during the campaign, have pushed us to pull out from our presidential aspirations.
Over 50 FARC members have been murdered since the Havana agreements were signed. The political party urged the national government to guarantee their safety and access to funds so they can participate in the democratic process.
The framework is there to get the funds, and they were enacted some days ago, but there are restrictions from the Colombian Agrarian Bank, like preemptive audits and co-administration of our finances.
The FARC also still needs to discuss if it wants to forge alliances with other political forces.
We have to wait, but we have already said that we are open to dialogue. We want to talk to other forces that also wish the best for Colombia, and we hope that they are open to talk to us too.
According to human rights activist Jorge Rojas, FARC's decision is bad news for the peace process.
It will be good for the FARC to run with another candidate to see how they work in the democratic scene. It is also true that they are still running for Congress anyway. Let's see how much support they get and how they move in the political scene.
Analysts and social organizations are wondering what kind of democracy Colombia has, where the government guarantees participation to opposition and social movements, but the killing of social leaders continues. The Colombian people have the chance to make a change in the country and start a new chapter in its history in which peace agreements are a reality. José Manuel Jiménez, teleSUR, Bogotá, Colombia.
The Ecuadorian government has asked Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos to return to the negotiating table with the National Liberation Army of Colombia, the ELN. In an official statement, Ecuador's government said it is willing to offer everything that Colombia requires to achieve complete peace for the sake of a peaceful future for Latin America and the Caribbean. The ELN is the only guerrilla group that still operates in Colombia after the government reached a peace agreement with the FARC. Cubans are also voting on Sunday. 18 million people will cast their vote for members of the Provincial and National Assemblies. Our correspondent in Havana, Laura Prada, has more.
The Cuban capital is busy as usual. However, these walls and windows make passersby stop. They're showing the biographies and pictures of those standing for delegates to the provincial assemblies and members of the National Assembly of Popular Power.
We are calling on all mass and social organizations to take part in this process. We are talking about the CDRs, the Combatants Association, and the Federation. The election is less than 72 hours away. Last Sunday, a trial vote took place to make certain the electoral authorities are coordinating properly. We saw that all voting centers are ready and that we will be able to accomplish our task successfully.
The large number of women in these elections is notable. 322 women are standing for seats in the parliament, which is 53% of the total. That means the National Assembly of Cuba will become the second legislative body in the world with a majority of female representatives.
The work of women has been significant throughout the revolutionary process in Cuba. The recognition of the role of women and also the role they played in the Cuban society is considered fundamental for the economic and social development of the society. It is also important they have such a representation in Congress.
Another sector of the Cuban society that will play an essential place in these elections is the youth, because they represent the continuity of the Cuban revolutionary process.
We, the youth, have to give our vote, thinking about why we are voting. To whom are we giving our vote? This is a person who will represent us not only in our neighborhood, but more widely. They are not only our neighbors, but our colleagues.
On Sunday, the city will see a historic election, and teleSUR will be there to cover it minute by minute.
Over in Venezuela, the vice president of the United Socialist Party, Diosdado Cabello, highlighted the importance of a peaceful election. He criticized the opposition's plans to create social unrest around the presidential and legislative elections on May 20th. Cabello said the mud opposition is preparing to stir protests despite the guarantees offered by the National Electoral Council. He also said the U.S. government is supporting this disruptive plan. And in a shocking turn of events, U.S. President Donald Trump has accepted an invitation from the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un. It will be the first time the two heads of state will meet face-to-face. Just months ago, they were threatening to wipe each other out. The talks are expected to take place in May. According to the South Korean delegation, Kim has agreed to freeze Pyongyang's nuclear program during the dialogue. News of the impending dialogue was welcomed by South Korea, which has been on edge over the potential threat of a nuclear war.
We believe if the two of them meet after the North-South Korea summit, it could set the course of total denuclearization on the Korean peninsula. And the meeting in May between Kim and Trump will be a historic moment for the peace of the Korean peninsula.
Now, the thawing of relations between Washington and Pyongyang is beneficial for China as well. That's because tougher sanctions on North Korea could result in millions of refugees crossing into China and the constant presence of U.S. troops on its borders.
We welcome the positive news of direct talks between the U.S. and North Korea. The solution to the nuclear issue on the Korean peninsula is continuing to march in the correct direction. China offers full approval and support to the relevant sides committed to resolving the issue via talks.
We'll take a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. Antigua and Barbuda has withdrawn from the second preparatory meeting of the Summit of the Americas to be held in Peru in April. Sir Ronald Sanders, Antigua and Barbuda's ambassador to the Organization of American States, said this decision was made out of principle after Venezuela was excluded from the meetings without any explanation. Sanders said the country will take part in meetings when the situation is rectified. And a High Court judge in Antigua has reserved judgment in the injunction to prevent Barbudans from voting in Antigua. The judge has not said when she will make the ruling. The election is on March 21st. However, the Electoral Commission of Antigua and Barbuda continues preparations for the elections despite the legal challenge. The Electoral Commission says they're collaborating with the National Office of Disaster Services to bring approximately 400 Barbudans across to Antigua to vote. And election observers are on their way to Grenada for the March 13th election. The CARICOM Secretariat and the Organization of American States have already sent delegations to oversee the elections. They've also invited the Electoral Office of Jamaica to travel to Grenada as well. This election sees the National Democratic Congress, led by Nizam Burke, running up against Dr. Keith Mitchell of the New National Party, who has been Prime Minister since 2013. He previously served from 1995 to 2008, and he's currently ahead in the polls. There is a huge banner flying over the Caribbean which says it's open for business. The region saw tourist arrivals rise for the 8th year in a row, despite the onslaught of hurricanes Maria and Irma. Here's a look at its prospects.
The Caribbean welcomed more than 30 million visitors last year. The Caribbean Tourism Organization says that is a result of the steady progress in recovery efforts. It adds that investments are continuing to pour in, and that will keep tourists buoyant. Case in point, Jamaica. It has been recognized as a tourism location of the future by the Financial Times. The report acknowledges the country's efforts in medical and community tourism. It also received kudos for its Shovel Ready program, a government initiative offering investors prepackaged opportunities. To keep the economy pumping, the government has earmarked almost $17 billion to build infrastructure. The focus will be on building and maintaining roads in both rural and urban areas. The project will also help with job creation. The International Monetary Fund has raised its growth forecast for the Bahamas. It expects the economy will be lifted by growth in tourism, especially since the Bahamar resort became fully operational. The IMF says there is also foreign investment interest in the Bahamas. However, there may be some caution about Barbados after Parliament was dissolved, but no election date was announced. Analysts say the investors will not commit funds amid uncertainty. A senior banker said investment in mortgages have already dropped. Barbados ranks 132 out of 190 countries in the world. Banks Doing Business 2018 report.
A Brazilian judge has sentenced former Petrobras CEO Aldemar Bendin to 11 years in prison for corruption and money laundering. Bendin was convicted of taking $1 million in bribes from the Brazilian construction giant Odebrecht. The judge's decision is based on an investigation known as Operation Car Wash, which has led to the conviction of several politicians, businessmen, and other former Petrobras senior executives and contractors. Peru's Consumer Association is suing Coca-Cola for misleading consumers. The group known as ASPEC says that Coca-Cola's nutritional information presents confusing, contradictory, and misleading information to consumers. The group says that this crucial data is necessary to help the public make informed decisions, particularly regarding the amount of sugar and additives in their products, which also include Fanta and Sprite. Mexico's Finance Minister Jose Antonio Gonzalez Anaya says the country needs to improve the way it tackles financial crimes. This comes after criticism from the Financial Action Task Force, an international organization that combats illicit finance. Mexico is dogged by financial crime due to drug cartels laundering billions of dollars there every year.
I think we have to improve the rule of law so that these things can be prosecuted more efficiently. But the conviction is there. And I think the fact that we have been making progress in these, that we have captured many of the, of the biggest criminals, shows you that the conviction to fight crime is there. We need to work on these issues.
Mexico's presidential candidates have responded to the lack of water in the capital. It has become a key campaign issue.
Protests over a lack of water in various areas of the Mexican capital have been on the rise over the past weeks. Citizens blame this on the inefficient distribution of the liquid and careless growth of building sites.
They shouldn't allow those buildings. There are too many apartments in those huge towers. A lot more people will live here, and there's not enough water. In city towers, they will even have a water park.
During this presidential electoral process, the authorities leaving office said that the lack of water is a political move.
The other thing they're doing, and this is more of a political thing, is closing valves. We will catch them and put them in jail, because this is a non-violent crime.
After an event called by real estate businesswoman Alejandra Barrales, the candidates representing Coalición por México al Frente supported the government's position.
Sadly, during this presidential race, we will have people who don't care about anything and that will damage other to upset people.
She said that this is an old problem that comes from misusing hydro resources.
For example, some areas have spent a month and a half with a water crisis just because the system doesn't send enough of it through to them. I mean, what's the reason for this? Maybe they just don't know how the city system works.
Meanwhile, the candidate for Partido Revolucionario Institucional is focusing his campaign efforts on attacking his rivals. Claudia Schinbaum leads the polls. She comes from the national regeneration movement, Morena.
Today we confirm what we have been saying. She's live illegally. There are 4 examples that show that she is still doing it.
Next 1st of July, citizens of the capital will choose their new capital governor, 16 mayors and 66 deputies for local Congress.
We're going to take another short break, but join us again after this. Look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. U.S. President Donald Trump has signed a proclamation bringing in tariffs of 25% on steel and 10% on aluminium. The tariffs will go into effect in 15 days. White House officials say the tariffs are an essential part of domestic and economic security. Canada and Mexico are exempt from the tariffs until a new NAFTA agreement comes up. But the controversial tax plan has triggered strong reactions from around the world. For instance, Brazil, the second largest supplier of steel to the United States, has said it will take all necessary bilateral and multilateral actions to preserve its interests and its rights. In a tweet, the Brazilian National Federation of Industry condemned the duties. Earlier this year, Brazil reminded Washington that it is the largest importer of U.S. coal. The government added that it hasn't ruled out retaliatory action. And China has warned the decision could trigger a trade war. It says this is trade protectionism masked as national security. The European Union expects to be excluded from the tariffs. It has threatened to lodge a complaint with the World Trade Organization. And now let's have a look at some other stories from around the world.
At least 7 people have been killed in a suicide attack in the Afghan capital, Kabul. The attack was carried out by a suicide bomber who walked into a crowd and blew himself up. The blast comes a week after another suicide bomb killed 1 and wounded more than 20 people. No one has claimed the responsibility for the attack. Pressure has been brewing in Afghanistan since the President Ashraf Ghani announced his willingness to have peace talks with the Taliban 2 weeks ago. A court in Istanbul has sentenced 25 journalists to prison with terms up to 7.5 years. Most of the journalists worked for Zaman newspaper. They were accused of aiding the network of a US-based Muslim cleric who is believed to have led the failed coup in 2016.
The Cumhuriyet trial is one of the symbolic freedom of press cases in Turkey. It is unacceptable for journalists to stay in prison that long, just because they express their thoughts or publish headlines.
Danish submarine and rocket builder Peter Madsen has denied murder charges. He is on trial for allegedly killing Swedish journalist Kim Wall last year. Madsen has been charged with sexually abusing, murdering and dismembering the 30-year-old journalist. Wall was reported missing after she went to interview Madsen aboard his self-built submarine in the Bay of Copenhagen. French President Emmanuel Macron is in India for a 4-day visit intended at strengthening trade relations between the two nations. One of the major issues on the table is the Rafale fighter jet deal, which both sides have been negotiating for more than 10 years. India had initially asked for more than 100 jets, but dropped the order to just 36 planes after a surge in prices.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Sony Gray. Thank you so much for watching.